Good morning. Thank you all for being here. We are delighted to have you be part of this special series of Black History Month programs presented by the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in collaboration with Hiram College, the Cleveland History Center at Western Reserve Historical Society, and WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. Now, to start the program, we're going to introduce you to some of the people who are helping to make it happen. Take a look at the screen and you'll see messages from the President and Chief Executive Officer for WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, Kevin Martin, followed by the President of the Board of Trustees for the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, Mark Druckenbrode. You'll also hear from KeyBank Executive Vice President David M. Reynolds, speaking on behalf of our community partner and presenting sponsor, the KeyBank Foundation, and we'll wrap up the welcomes with Tracy Oliver, the Director of Media and Local Affairs for Dominion East Ohio. Let's watch.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you. Well, welcome to WVIC Idea Stream Black History Month special program series. This series will be featuring prominent African Americans who are buried in Lakeview Cemetery. Now, the program is sponsored by the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, the Dominion Gas, the KeyBank Foundation, and with special assistance and support from the WVIZ PBS Education Department. The program today is originating, as Dee just mentioned, from the Westfield studio at the Idea Center here at the Playhouse Square. I want to thank our very own Dee Perry of WVIZ Idea Stream for hosting and facilitating this program, and the professors from Hiram College, and to all our guest speakers for each of the 4 programs that will be featured throughout this month. All of the many students that will be here throughout the series from Northeast Ohio. I also want to extend a very special thanks to Judy Kamoa Hart, the Executive Director of the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, Mary Cromer, Director of Community Outreach for the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, our very own Linda Williams, Senior Director of the WVIZ Idea Stream Education Department, and last but certainly not least is John Ramacone, Distance Learning Director at WVIZ Idea Stream, for the behind-the-scenes work that he's doing in creating this outstanding educational program. We hope you enjoy this series.
Thank you, Dee. Well, good morning. It's an honor to be here with you today. The Lakeview Cemetery Foundation is pleased to bring you the series of lectures on prominent African Americans buried at the Lakeview Cemetery. These individuals have contributed economically, culturally, and civically to Northeast Ohio, the nation, and the world. I'm also very honored and pleased to be collaborating with WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, Hiram College, and the History Center of the Western Reserve Historical Society. And very special thanks again to our sponsors, KeyBank Foundation and Dominion. Black History Month has become a very important part of Lakeview Cemetery's educational programming, in which we promote positive examples of historical events, exemplary leaders, and progress towards social change. This month is not only deeply meaningful for the African American community, but imperative for all of us to gain a better understanding of the nation and of the world. By reliving and remembering Black history, we create an awareness of the struggles and challenges that African Americans overcame in this country. Their perseverance serves as an inspiration for us all. Every race is connected to the rich history of this nation, and by celebrating Black History Month, everyone can be included in the tradition of acknowledgement, inclusion, and community engagement. So I thank you for your presence here today, and welcome.
Hello, my name is David Reynolds, and I'm a Senior Vice President with Key Private Bank, here representing KeyBank and the KeyBank Foundation. We are very excited to partner with Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in recognizing Black History Month and African American achievement. We at KeyBank understand the importance of diversity and consider it one of our pillars of success, internally and also externally in the Cleveland and greater Cleveland community. We believe that we should support the communities that we live and work in, and we're happy to partner with Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in its great work. We want to congratulate Lakeview Cemetery Foundation and wish it continued success. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Oliver, the Director of Media and Local Affairs at Dominion East Ohio. It's my privilege to join with KeyBank Foundation in presenting Lakeview Cemetery's Black History Month lecture series. Now, this program provides a wonderful opportunity to recognize the achievements of some truly exceptional men and women as part of our Black History Month celebration. These contributions are important regionally, nationally, and internationally. Dominion sponsored this collaboration in order to provide a unique learning experience. Through this program, we are looking to raise awareness of outstanding leaders and to expose students to people whose lives were both rich and diverse. It is our hope that the hundreds of participating students will pay close attention to the traits and the innovative characteristics of these heroes. Many of their attributes, including hard work, vision, integrity, and a determined spirit, are still vital ingredients of personal and professional success. Dominion incorporates diversity and inclusion as a key component of our business as well. Making decisions based off of multiple perspectives and a range of ideas, it just makes sense. At Dominion, we follow the guiding principles of respect, fairness, and consistency to ensure that our work environment is one in which every team member feels valued, so that our corporate culture can attract, develop, and retain the best and the brightest employees. So we're proud to partner with this lecture series, and we look forward to continuing to serve our employees, our customers, and students across the region. Thank you, and enjoy today's program.
Well done. And again, thanks to all our partners. And we're very pleased to be speaking to students remotely from Jane Addams Business Career Center, John Adams High School, Glenville High School, Martin Luther King Career Center, and Warrensville Heights Middle School. And in the house, we have students from the Positive Education Program and from Garrett Morgan High School. Welcome to you all. Today, there are more than 107,000 grave sites at Lakeview Cemetery, and many of them belong to people whose names you might recognize from your history books, including the African-American inventor Garrett Morgan. Here to tell us more is the Director of External Affairs for Kent State University, who also happens to be the granddaughter of Garrett Morgan. Please welcome Sandra Morgan.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very pleased to speak to you a bit about my grandfather, Garrett Morgan. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the Foundation for the Cemetery, Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, as well as the other schools that are also participating in this program. I've decided to change my tactic a little bit in our conversation today because it occurs to me that while I was talking a little bit earlier, Garrett Morgan is my grandfather, but he's a part of your legacy too, because you attend Garrett Morgan School, and so by extension, you are one of us. You're a Morgan, all right? And so as we've been told all of our lives, we carry a heavy name, all of us. We are all a part of the Morgan family. And you have to really acknowledge and carry that heavy name with pride and dignity and knowledge. All right? So I'm going to tell you today a little bit about your grandfather and mine. These are stories that you may not have known and things that you may not know about Garrett Morgan. As an example, did you know that in addition to being an inventor, he really was an adventurer, an entrepreneur? Of course, he was an inventor, but he was also a civic leader in this town. He was a very important man. He had a wide legacy here, and it's what you should know, because when you are talking to your friends and family about your grandfather, you need to know these things, right? You need to represent our family well. So here we go. Let's make sure I can do this. Oh. Let's see. Whoops. All right, so we've skipped over the cover slide. That's okay. We'll talk about Garrett Morgan, the adventurer. Garrett Morgan, as you know, was born in when? 1877. 1877 in Lexington, Kentucky. Actually, he was born in Paris, Kentucky, which was a very small town outside of Lexington, Kentucky. It was the town where the African Americans lived in that community. He had a number of siblings. There were 9 children altogether. He was in the middle, and he went to school up until the 5th grade. At that time, 5th grade was a pretty good education because a lot of kids didn't get to go to school at all. So he, along with his 5th grade education, at the age of 14, decided that he was not going to stay in Kentucky anymore because, after all, there wasn't a whole lot to do in Kentucky for an African-American young man at the time, especially with a 5th grade education. So he decided to come to the big city in the bright lights of Cincinnati, Ohio. How do you think he got there? He walked. There were no cars then, remember? In 1891, there were no cars. There was no Uber, no buses. There were horses and things like that, but he was a poor young man. So he walked to the banks of the Ohio River and took a boat and found himself in Cincinnati, where he went to work at a farm grooming horses. Well, he decided that Southern Ohio was really just an extension of northern Kentucky, and he needed to move on because he really was looking for opportunity, and he didn't see that opportunity where he was. So what did he do? The adventurer, Garrett Morgan, at 14 years old, got himself hitched a ride on a train. And now he didn't buy a ticket. What did he do? He jumped on the train while it was moving, or right when it was starting to move. He got on the train and rode to Cleveland. That was for him the promised land. Why? Because at the time, Cleveland was a hot and exciting city. There was a lot going on here. There was industrial expansion. There were all sorts of people coming from all over the world here. There was a textile industry. There was a lot happening. And even though he wasn't reading the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, word traveled in many ways. And he also could read about it in his own newspapers, because he could read and he could write and he could do basic math. So when he got to Cleveland, imagine what Garrett Morgan, the adventurer, saw. He saw what he considered a bustling city, like nothing he'd ever seen before, with all kinds of opportunities, including work opportunities for himself. So he got a job at the Root McBride. Well, he had a couple of jobs, but his final job that he landed in was the Root McBride Company, where he was a maintenance man. But while he was a maintenance man, he realized that there were some things that were not so great about the manufacturing process there. Number one, the sewing machines broke down frequently. And these were primarily women who worked there, and they made dresses and shirts and things like that, right? Because Cleveland at the time was one of the leading cities for manufacture of clothing and hats and the like. Well, the sewing machines broke down all the time, and that was problematic for 2 reasons. Number one, the women who worked there made everything by the piece, and so if they didn't finish a piece, they didn't get paid. And by extension, then the company lost money. So usually what happened to that woman? Fired. Okay, that's not a good idea, not a good thing for them. So he thought, well, there's got to be a better way for these sewing machines to continue to work. And if you look at the picture you see on the sewing machine, well, on this one, not such a good picture, I admit, I picked. But at the end of the wheel, there was typically a leather band. And that leather band made the sewing machine move. Well, they snapped and broke all the time. So he went home, he put his thinking cap on, and he said, I bet if we made this band out of rubber, number one, it wouldn't snap because there wouldn't be any weak spots in it. It would be one continuous piece. And number two, when it was just as a one big loop, it could very easily fly off or snap or something could happen to it. So he configured it like a figure 8. And that held the tension on the wheel at all times so that it wouldn't snap off, so that it wouldn't come off. He was not a physicist. He didn't know anything about physics, but he knew that it would work. And sure enough, when he went to Root McBride and presented them with his idea, they tried it out, and it worked. And it worked very well. And so as a result of that, he got a couple of things. Well, actually, he got 3 things. Number one, he got a $150 bonus, which in the 1890s was a lot of money. Number two, he got a promotion. So he was no longer sweeping the floors. He was now responsible for fixing the sewing machines. But most importantly, he got confidence because he realized that if you can make $150 as a bonus for coming up with something that to him just made common sense, then there was actually something more than he could do. And he was in the right place to meet his destiny. He worked at Root McBride for a while, and then he decided to strike out on his own. This is Garrett Morgan, the entrepreneur. You know, it seems like we all think of our grandfather as being this guy who just sat around and thought of great ideas and made big inventions and became famous. Not true. He worked very hard in order to get where he got. So again, the adventurer turned into an entrepreneur once he got here. He saw that he had some ideas that were workable. He looked at the marketplace and determined where he could fit in. So when he left Root McBride, he did a little bit of everything. Did you know that he had a store where he sold live poultry and eggs? His wife, which is quite hysterical. I don't know if you've ever seen real chickens and everything that goes on in one of those places, but it can be pandemonium. His wife, my grandmother Mary, our grandmother, sewed clothing. She did piecework for the Richmond brothers. She opened up a little shop and sold clothing. They did a little bit of everything in order to make ends meet because making ends meet was important to them. They had a family. They had to make sure that their children were fed and clothed and had an opportunity to go to school and get an education. But more importantly, he knew that he needed to have that money in order to move him up to the next level. You have to build a solid foundation before you can move up. And that's what he was doing. So next he thought, well, he saw Madam C.J. Walker making money. He saw all these hair products. People were starting to, get glamorous. And he said, I think I can do something like that myself. He came up with a whole line of hair care products, including the Garrett Morgan black hair pomade, the black hair oil stain, which, by the way, men could use both on their hair and to dye their mustaches. He had a whole line of products, including even a hot comb that I'm sure was very popular. There we go. Was very popular with the men and women here in Cleveland and throughout the East Coast. You see his Garrett Morgan's Lay Fine pomade, which would make your hair lie down very nicely so that you could have that chic of Araby look if you were a man. And you have the Garrett Morgan heavy hair pressing comb, which was designed, he actually held a patent for that pressing comb because instead of straight tines, they were curved, so you wouldn't burn your head when you were pressing your hair, which is pretty important, I think. But at any rate, it was a business that grew very rapidly, and he did very well in this business. And that, again, was another brick in the foundation that helped him to go where he wanted to go in life, and helped him with his inventive process. And I can show you some of the pictures that we used to laugh about, actually, but you could go from hair that was a little on the unruly side to hair that laid down just perfectly, just with a little dab of the hair pomade. Looked beautiful. So during the course of this time, Garrett Morgan was becoming more and more secure. Financially secure, intellectually secure, emotionally secure. He was married, he had a family, he had businesses that were doing well, and he had an opportunity now to really think. All right, he had a time to think about what he liked to do. And he noticed, again, based on what was happening all around him and just being observant and curious and thoughtful, that there was a lot happening with the rapid industrialization of the United States and Northeast Ohio in particular. There were lots and lots and lots of fires and explosions and other problems that were a direct result of, frankly, deregulation or non-regulation of industries. But, these fires caused big problems because people got trapped. They couldn't get out. And the fire departments didn't have the appropriate tools in order to get in and get people out. So if they weren't there at the very beginning, or if people didn't hurl themselves out of buildings or otherwise run out, they were not going to survive. So What did our grandfather do? He thought, oh, something has to be done about this. We cannot just have people dying in these buildings. We have to create some safety mechanisms in order to help them get out. Hence the Garrett Morgan safety hood. Now, I don't think it will come to any surprise to any of you that the safety hood actually was not the first one ever invented. There are any number of safety hoods and safety breathing devices that were invented over the course of time, but his was unique. And the reason he's got a patent is because in addition to having a contraption that fit over your head, I'm not going to put it on, but something that went over your head with eye coverings and a mask. It also had a filter pack. It had a carbon filter pack. And that carbon filter pack is what made the difference, because you could recycle air. You could actually breathe a lot longer, and you could stay in a facility or in a place that was dangerous and not be overcome by noxious fumes, right? It was a big deal. It was a huge deal, and it was critically important not only to safety in the United States, industrial safety. In fact, I'm sure you all know that he won an award in 1911 at the New York Safety Expo. The sad thing was that he was not able to accept his award because as an African American, he was not allowed to go. He was not invited to be a part of the programming, even though his product was on display. But it was okay because he hired someone to represent him. He won the safety exposition, and that's what mattered to him. It certainly hurt his feelings that he wasn't able to see his product win the program. But you know what? At the end of the day, it won, and he made money, and that was the important thing. He was able to sell his product to fire departments and police departments all around the country, and that was an important thing. Not to mention the important issue of saving lives. Here's a picture of Garrett Morgan with the safety hood. He's actually wearing it. He was quite proud of it and liked to model it himself. The safety hood took on extra importance here in Northeast Ohio in 1916. Roughly 100 years ago, this past summer, there was an explosion under Lake Erie. How many of you are aware of that? They were building the tunnels for what is now the waterworks on the west side, and there was a huge explosion. They hit a gas pocket, and it trapped a number of men underneath the lake. Imagine the drama of being trapped under the lake and 5 miles away from shore. Can you imagine? It would be a frightening proposition. A number of men went down into the lake. They went under the mine shaft, they went down to the lake, and as soon as they got down there, they weren't prepared for the gases and the fumes they were going to encounter, and they immediately fell on the ground and started gasping for air and couldn't help anyone. So now there were 2 groups of men down there that couldn't survive. They were worried. They thought everyone was lost, everyone was going to die. Until they remembered good old Garrett Morgan. Garrett Morgan had these safety hoods, and so they called him. He and his brother Frank went down to the lake, and they, in their pajamas, because it was 3 o'clock in the morning or so. It was really, it was late, either late night or early morning, however you see it. He got down there. They told him, you can't put on your shoes. You have to go down in the mine in your bare feet. Why? Because you have to be able to feel for the live wires that might be on the ground. If you stepped on them on your shoes, you might electrocute yourself and die. You have to use your feet to feel where you're going to go and feel for wires. I'd be scared. I don't know about you. I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if I'd want to go down there. And yet, our brave grandfather took himself, he pulled up his socks, put on his gas mask, got his brother, went down the shaft, went underneath the lake, and saw those men and was absolutely stunned at what he saw. The men, the carnage of what had happened down there. Men lying everywhere, moaning, blood, you name it. It was there. But he had to act quickly because he didn't want to be down there for further explosions or anything else. And so he and his brother quickly loaded many of the dead men, many as they could, into the cart. And then those who were still alive, as many as they could, they put on the top of the cart, wheeled it to the mine shaft, came up, and were met with absolute astonishment. Absolute astonishment, because everyone thought that they were goners. But they came back up. They had, again, a number of the men who were alive, several of the men who were dead, and they were quickly pulled out of the carts, and then everyone put on gas masks and went down into the mine and quickly pulled out and rescued the rest of the men that were there. Unfortunately, most of them were dead at that point, and brought them up to the shore. It was still important to retrieve the bodies because there were families who were interested in their loved ones and wanted to know what had happened to them. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy for the city of Cleveland, and a terrible tragedy, in our industrial history here. What was an even greater tragedy for Garrett Morgan was, once again, when it was time for recognition, many of the men who went down received medals, received bonuses, and were generally hailed as heroes by the press, with the exception of Garrett Morgan. Garrett Morgan was left out. Our grandfather was left out because they did not acknowledge that he was even there. Said, well, we can't be sure it was you. Well, we don't know if it was your gas mask. We don't know, humana. And he didn't get the recognition that he deserved. All the same, he was not deterred. He continued to work. He said, he wrote a famous letter to the mayor of Cleveland at that time, and he said, I am Garrett Morgan. I live at 5202 Harlem Avenue. I'm not an educated man. However, I have a PhD from the College of Hard Knocks and Cruel Treatment. I've saved 9 lives, and then he went on to read the Mayor the Riot Act, about why he should have been recognized and the fact that he was not. However, he did not allow that to deter him. He continued to work on behalf of his city and to work towards public safety. I think we'll go past this one. We'll show you the picture of the Lake Erie disaster. That's him with his gas mask thrown off of his head and onto his back. This is a picture that was on the front page center of the Cleveland Press, and yet they couldn't be sure that he was there. This is a copy of, or a picture of what a refined gas mask looked like, and this is second generation after my grandfather's safety hood. And finally, a little showing off here. This is me this past summer, accepting an award on his behalf at the Garrett A. Morgan Waterworks last July, where I was happy to again receive acknowledgement for his contributions in the Lake Erie crib disaster of 1916. And also to meet the families of some of the men who either died or survived that tragedy. It was amazing to be a part of that because, we all have our sides of that story, and it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to meet with and talk to the descendants of the family members who were also down in that tunnel, as I said, many of whom died. Really very touching. And the first time, it took 100 years to pull us all together, which I think was pretty amazing. All right, so let's move along now. By now, he's doing quite well. Again, he's building blocks. Remember, his foundation is getting stronger and stronger, thicker and thicker. He's got his gas mask. He's got his hair business. He's given up the chickens, but he's still got the sewing business. He's doing pretty well for himself. So he notices there's another issue that really demands some attention. This is 1920 style traffic. This is 1920 style Cleveland traffic. If you take a good look at this picture, it's sheer pandemonium. There's horses, there's cars, there's carts, there are pedestrians. There's a little bit everything. Everything known to man is on the road at any given time with no protocol whatsoever, meaning everybody is doing whatever they want to do. Get out of my way because I need to go where I'm going, right? Okay. So he saw a terrible accident, and accidents were pretty prevalent then. He saw a terrible accident and said, something's got to be done about this. The traffic signal that we currently have just doesn't work. Again, Garrett Morgan's traffic signal was not the first traffic signal, but it was a revolutionary one, okay? Because previously, traffic signals were stop and go. Stop and go. Well, first of all, and if you're a police officer standing in the middle of the road, even with a sign that says stop and go, do you want to stand in the middle of a road that looks like that and direct traffic? Absolutely not. Do you even want to stand or sit on a tower and direct traffic? I wouldn't. It would be a terrible job in my opinion. And number two, do horses know how to read stop and go? No. All right, so he had to figure out a way in order to make sure that there was a protocol in the intersections that allowed traffic to flow nicely. Today, it's called intelligent transportation systems. Okay, then he called it common sense. But here's what he did. He developed a traffic signal that had it was three-way. So it not only said stop and go, or red and green, it said caution. Something's about to change here. The traffic pattern is about to change. And so, if you're not in the intersection, then don't come into the intersection. And if you're in the intersection, get through the intersection, get out, because the traffic is about to come in the other direction. And believe it or not, that was considered revolutionary. And you know what else? It's still revolutionary. The traffic signal is one of the few signals one of the few inventions that has not changed dramatically since it was invented. It has changed in technology that is attached to it, but the simple premise of red, yellow, and green and the premise of getting out of the intersection has not changed since 1923. And I think that's something we all can be very proud of, don't you? I will show you a copy of the traffic signal. This is a copy of the traffic signal as it was designed and patented, and also as it sits. This is one of the original traffic signals, of which there are three, that sits at the Smithsonian Museum. This one is at the Smithsonian Museum of American History, soon to move to the Smithsonian Museum of African American History, to join its, the traffic or the gas mask and some other items that are already housed there. So once again, Garrett Morgan faced another dilemma. Now he had the traffic signal, which he sold the patent to General Electric, so he had now money. He had a good amount of money. So he had a very strong foundation, and he wanted to really continue and grow his businesses. But when he wanted to advertise his businesses, he couldn't, because the Plain Dealer and the Cleveland Press were not interested in accepting his money. They didn't want his advertisements, and they declined. They respectfully declined, but they declined all the same, all right? And he thought, okay, well, two things here. Number one, I need to advertise my products, and I can't do it by driving up and down the street, with signs on my car and a calliope in the back of my truck every Saturday. I need something that's broader than that, one. And number two, I want to hear some good news about my community, too. So in 1920, he developed the Cleveland Call, which was an African-American newspaper. And he placed his own advertisements in his own newspaper and encouraged his other African-American friends to do the same, which they did. In 1925, they merged with the Post and became the Call-and-Post, which is still today in production and one of the longest continually published African-American papers in the country, quite frankly. So anyway, it's needless to say, business exploded. They sold a lot of ads. They did very well. And the Plain Dealer and the Cleveland Press took notice and said, oh, there happens to be money in this community. Maybe we shouldn't have been so hasty. Maybe we should open our advertisement and our columns to other people. And they did. And so the good thing about that is that the newspapers became much more diverse in their outreach, in who they allowed to advertise, and the types of businesses and stories that they reached out to. And it was good news all around, because it didn't hurt the Call-and-Post in any way. It only enhanced the community and our outreach into the community. So it was all good. We're talking about, in case you haven't noticed, Garrett Morgan, entrepreneur, moving towards Garrett Morgan, civic leader. Because by now he's in a position to really to assert a little bit of authority and to assert some leadership and to speak on issues that he thought was important to the community at large and to the African American community in particular. This is a picture of our grandfather when he got a little older, but I'll tell you that before this picture was taken, he decided again that African Americans just didn't have the representation that they deserved in city government. It was truly it was taxation without representation. We paid taxes, bought homes, bought items, did whatever in the community, but there was no one that represented us in city council or in anywhere in city government. And so in the 1930s, actually 1932, he decided, I think it was 1932, he decided to run for city council. Now, he didn't win, but what it also did was open the door again for dialogue between the minority community and the majority community in Cleveland. They realized that this was a voting bloc that they should be paying attention to and listening to. And we gained a good deal of political power from then, throughout now. He belonged to a number of organizations that helped to build business for African Americans, helped to build civic life for African Americans, and most importantly, that educated African Americans. And I'm proud to say that our grandfather, in his name, over $1 million in scholarship money has been given to students who study transportation, study engineering, or that are involved in the civic communities of their communities. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope that you'll have learned a lot more about our grandfather, and when you are talking about him, you'll be able to speak with authority about what a complex, interesting, and cool relative you have. Thank you.
That was fascinating. Thank you very much, Sandra Morgan. We're almost out of time, but I think we still have a couple of minutes left for a presentation by Derek E. Moore, who's the curator of transportation for the Western Reserve Historical Society, and he's going to show you some of the Garrett Morgan artifacts from the collection.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you, Sandra, for a fascinating discussion on your grandfather. As Dee said, I'm Derek Moore. I'm the curator of transportation down at the Crawford Auto Aviation Museum at the Cleveland History Center. Obviously, I'm here mostly because of the traffic signal, but we also have a large archives down at the History Center, and we have, thanks to the Morgan family, a number of original documents from Garrett Morgan himself, and a number of other items, including a replica of the safety hood, which I'll talk about momentarily. But as you can see here, I'm just going to quickly go through a few things from the archives that we have here digitally. We have a number of family portraits. This is a portrait of Garrett Morgan with his two oldest children, and one of which is Sandra's father. Which one, right or left? On the left, Sandra's father. And then we have an image here of, I think I skipped. Well, there we go. Image here of Garrett Morgan's business card, and you can see the list of businesses that he had developed that Sandra just so wonderfully talked about. Picture of Garrett Morgan here as a younger gentleman, and then one a little bit older. We also have a number of product advertisements from the companies he developed. Here we have one from, obviously, the black oil hair stain, showing a young woman with her hair done nicely up in the with the hair stain. And then, of course, I believe Sandra actually used this image in her this exact image in her presentation for the pressing comb that Garrett Morgan had invented. And then this is a really great picture. This is actually an image taken at, as far as I know, at the shop of four gentlemen that used the hair care product, and it was to basically show what the product could do for the gentleman's hair. This is a very interesting photo, I think, because this is actually an image of a product stand for Garrett Morgan's hair care products actually at a display during World War II, where soldiers were able to actually come in. So it also speaks a little bit to the African American soldiers that we had serving America in World War II. And then here, very interesting, this is the pamphlet that was used for the company that Garrett Morgan had producing the safety hood, which again, the replica behind me. And then we have very interesting image here of the hood being used during a fire at a building. This is actually the image Sandra used as well here of Garrett Morgan actually pulling some of the injured gentlemen out of the crib disaster here in Cleveland. Again, another shot from the crib disaster. I believe that is Garrett Morgan again there with his back to the camera and the safety hood off. And then, as Sandra mentioned, we have Garrett Morgan wrote some very infamous letters or famous letters during his time as a civic leader and also in his businesses. And we have a number of those letters in our archives, thanks to, again, the Morgan family, who donated those to the Historical Society for their preservation. And I just have a number of scans here of those. And actually, I believe one of these is the letter you referenced, which is the letter to the mayor saying, hey, there's some issues here. Yes, and then here is probably the one of the coolest pictures, in my opinion, that I enjoy seeing, which is Garrett Morgan, obviously as an older gentleman, but standing next to his traffic signal that he had designed at obviously a public event where they were talking about the history of Garrett Morgan and the significant changes and inventions he made during his lifetime. So I'll leave you with that and appreciate everything Sandra talked about today. And hopefully if you all get a chance to come down to the museum, you'll get a chance to see the traffic light and also hopefully look in the archives to see some of the other great things the Morgan family has left behind of Garrett's. So thank you very much.
Thanks again to both Sandra and Derek, and thank you for your kind attention. We are almost out of time, but I want to remind you that 1 week from today, on Wednesday, February 22nd, we'll present another program in this special Black History Month series that focuses on political pioneers Carl and Louis Stokes, who, like Garrett Morgan, are buried in Lakeview Cemetery. Next week's talk will be presented here in the Westfield Theater by Hiram College history professor Vivian Sandlin. And again, thank you all for being here. Enjoy your lunch and travel safely. Good morning. My name is Dee Perry, and I want to welcome you to today's program, which is part of a special series of Black History Month events presented by the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in collaboration with Hiram College, the Cleveland History Center at Western Reserve Historical Society, and WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. Thank you all for being part of this presentation, whether you're here in the Westfield Theater as the Horizon Science Academy School and the Positive Enrichment Program students are, or watching us on distance learning from Jane Addams Business Career Center, Martin Luther King Career Center, Glenville High School, Warrensville Heights Middle School, John Adams High School, and Worcester High School. Thank you all for being part of this presentation. Now, to start the program, we want to introduce you to some of the people who are helping to make it happen. And take a look at the screen, and you'll see messages from the President and Chief Executive Officer for WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, Kevin Martin, followed by the President of the Board of Trustees for the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, Mr. Mark Druckenbrode. You'll also hear from KeyBank Executive Vice President David M. Reynolds, speaking on behalf of our community partner and presenting sponsor, the KeyBank Foundation. And we'll wrap up the welcomes with Tracy Oliver, the Director of Media and Local Affairs for Dominion. Let's watch.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you. Well, welcome to WVIC Idea Stream Black History Month special program series. This series will be featuring prominent African Americans who are buried in Lakeview Cemetery. Now, the program is sponsored by the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, the Dominion Gas, the KeyBank Foundation, and with special assistance and support from the WVIZ PBS Education Department. The program today is originating, as Dee just mentioned, from the Westfield studio at the Idea Center here at the Playhouse Square. I want to thank our very own Dee Perry of WVIZ Idea Stream for hosting and facilitating this program, and the professors from Hiram College, and to all our guest speakers for each of the 4 programs that will be featured throughout this month. All the many students that will be here throughout the series from Northeast Ohio. I also want to extend a very special thanks to Judy Camo Hart, the Executive Director of the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, Mary Cromer, Director of Community Outreach for the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, our very own Linda Williams, Senior Director of the WVIZ Idea Stream Education Department, and last but certainly not least is John Ramacone, Distance Learning Director at WVIZ Idea Stream, for the behind-the-scenes work that he's doing in creating this outstanding educational program. We hope you enjoy this series.
Thank you, Dee. Well, good morning. It's an honor to be here with you today. The Lakeview Cemetery Foundation is pleased to bring you the series of lectures on prominent African Americans buried at the Lakeview Cemetery. These individuals have contributed economically, culturally, and civically to Northeast Ohio, the nation, and the world. I'm also very honored and pleased to be collaborating with WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, Hiram College, and the History Center of the Western Reserve Historical Society. And very special thanks again to our sponsors, KeyBank Foundation and Dominion. Black History Month has become a very important part of Lakeview Cemetery's educational programming, in which we promote positive examples of historical events, exemplary leaders, and progress towards social change. This month is not only deeply meaningful for the African American community, but imperative for all of us to gain a better understanding of the nation and of the world. By reliving and remembering Black history, we create an awareness of the struggles and challenges that African Americans overcame in this country. Their perseverance serves as an inspiration for us all. Every race is connected to the rich history of this nation, and by celebrating Black History Month, everyone can be included in the tradition of acknowledgement, inclusion, and community engagement. So I thank you for your presence here today, and welcome.
Hello, my name is David Reynolds, and I'm a Senior Vice President with Key Private Bank, here representing Key Bank and the Key Bank Foundation. We are very excited to partner with Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in recognizing Black History Month and African American achievement. We at Key Bank understand the importance of diversity and consider it one of our pillars of success, internally and also externally in the Cleveland and greater Cleveland community. We believe that we should support the communities that we live and work in, and we're happy to partner with Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in its great work.